Why you have to make all these excuses for her? This, like I said, all this was this week was people who said, "Oh, she ran a flawless campaign. How ridiculous!" Or it's sexism, it's racism. This is an old playbook.
Yes, I didn't say any of those things.
I know, but I've heard a lot of these things, and I think America's perfectly willing to elect a woman. They just didn't like the last two that were put up.
The vice president to Joe Biden, whether it was a male, female, black, white, or anything else, was going to have a giant political albatross around their neck, and they could perform perfectly or perform imperfectly. But that person was going to be at a disadvantage.
She didn't make a good case.
Well,
she didn't denounce the past stuff that people didn't like. She just tried to ignore it.
Bill Maher is on fire, and MSNBC is feeling the heat. Bill Maher has never been one to hold back, but this time he's absolutely torching the outdated arguments of MSNBC guests, and the internet can't get enough. At this rate, MSNBC might need to rethink whether Maher's platform is really the right place for their talking points, because every time they step into his arena, they walk away embarrassed. So who was in Maher's crosshairs this time? What argument did they bring to the table that completely fell apart under his scrutiny? And why is the internet exploding over this latest takedown? We've got all the details right here, so stick with us as we break it down. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more unfiltered and compelling content just like this. The clash that left MSNBC scrambling, it all started when insert guest's name appeared on Real Time with Bill Maher, fully expecting to push the usual MSNBC narrative. But Maher wasn't having any of it. Instead of nodding along, he picked apart their points one by one, exposing flaws that left the guests visibly struggling to keep up. Whether it was on issues of free speech, political correctness, media bias, or hypocrisy within the left, Maher made it clear. He's not playing by anyone's script, and that's exactly why his audience loves him. He's not afraid to challenge both the left and the right, making him one of the few voices in media who isn't completely predictable. Why this moment matters. What makes this clash stand out from Maher's usual debates? Simple, the reaction. Viewers across social media are flooding Twitter, YouTube, and Reddit, praising Maher for calling out the hypocrisy in real time. Some are even saying MSNBC guests should stop coming on his show if they can't handle the heat. And let's be honest, MSNBC isn't in a position to take more hits. Their credibility has already taken blows in recent years, and every time one of their guests gets humiliated on Maher's platform, it only fuels their critics. Is Maher becoming the new face of independent thinking? Love him or hate him, Bill Maher is proving time and time again that he won't be boxed into a single political ideology. While MSNBC and other mainstream outlets tend to lean into their respective echo chambers, Maher is doing something different, challenging both sides, unafraid of alienating part of his audience in the process. So what does this mean for the future of media debates? Will Maher continue to be a platform where mainstream narratives get dismantled in real time? And will MSNBC reconsider sending their guests into what's starting to look like a losing battle? One thing is certain, the internet is loving every second of it. What do you think? Is Maher exposing the flaws in mainstream media, or is he just stirring controversy for the sake of it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this debate is far from over. And if you don't want to miss out on more moments like this, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more explosive debates, takedowns, and insights.
Everything the candidates, especially the Democrats, do to get voters annoys them. The constant texting. Did you get the texts like from Tim Walz every 5 minutes, and like always begging for money and knocking on doors? We've got people knocking on doors. People don't want knocking on your door. Who in this day and age wants someone knocking on? Kids don't even like it when a phone call. That's like too much of a invasion of their privacy.
Bill Maher didn't hold back when he expertly exposed the flaws in John Heileman's argument on MSNBC. Heileman had claimed that Kamala Harris lost the election because her message didn't resonate with the right audience. But Maher quickly set the record straight. The problem wasn't the message, it was the medium. The Democrats banked heavily on legacy media outlets like MSNBC and CNN, networks already preaching to their own choir. Meanwhile, Donald Trump was reaching an entirely different demographic, traffic by tapping into alternative platforms like Joe Rogan's podcast and Theo Von's show. These platforms weren't just neutral, they attracted massive, politically diverse audiences, giving Trump a reach that traditional media simply couldn't match. When the Democrats realized their conventional approach wasn't working, they panicked. Instead of adjusting their strategy to meet voters where they were, they resorted to invasive tactics, mass text messages, aggressive door-to-door campaigns, and unsolicited phone calls. Rather than engaging with potential supporters organically, they ended up annoying them. Maher's critique didn't stop there. He highlighted a fundamental flaw in the Democratic Party's strategy, an over-reliance on top-down messaging. Instead of fostering grassroots conversations in the digital spaces people actually use, like YouTube, TikTok, and independent podcasts, they clung to outdated methods, believing that control over traditional media would be enough to shape public opinion. The irony? This exact playbook had already failed them in previous elections. Yet rather than learning from their mistakes, they doubled down, alienating not just undecided voters, but also their own base. So what's next? Will the Democrats finally wake up to the changing media landscape, or will they continue fighting a battle using tactics from the past? With 2028 on the horizon, one thing is certain: whoever masters the art of digital engagement will have the upper hand. But what do you think? Did the Democrats lose because of messaging, or was it really about failing to adapt to new media? Let us know your thoughts below. The debate is just getting started.
Who might emerge as the strongest Democratic opposition leader in the next Trump era? Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, like Adam Schiff, he won, right, big. And
he won big. I like Wes Moore.
Wes Moore's fantastic. He's in Maryland.
Yep.
But who's going to be the one? Gavin Newsom, we have here in this state. He's already called the legislature to. Trump hasn't done anything yet, but I understand the.
What is this journalist even talking about? The Democrats already had their message locked in. Kamala Harris's job was simply to amplify it, and supposedly everything would fall neatly into place. But here's the problem. That strategy was built on a flawed assumption. Americans aren't just passive consumers of political rhetoric. They don't base their votes on polished speeches or rehearsed talking points. They vote based on reality, and the reality they were living in was undeniable. Skyrocketing inflation, surging crime rates, and a border crisis that seemed to have no end. These weren't just political buzzwords. They were real problems affecting everyday people. So when Democrats doubled down on their message, hoping that repetition would be enough to win voters over, they failed to see the bigger issue. It wasn't just about who was delivering the message. It was about the message itself, and voters had already rejected it. Even if Joe Biden had been at his sharpest, fully energized, and free of the age-related concerns that dominated headlines, the outcome wouldn't have changed. If anything, a more forceful Biden might have led to an even greater loss because the core issues remained the same. The American people weren't interested in hearing the same talking points. They wanted real solutions, and they didn't feel like they were getting them. The truth is, Democrats underestimated the power of public sentiment. They assumed voters could be won over with carefully crafted narratives, but they overlooked one crucial reality. When people are struggling to pay their bills, feel unsafe in their communities, and see chaos at the border, no amount of political spin can change their minds. And now, with the election over and the dust settling, the Democratic Party finds itself at a crossroads. Do they acknowledge their missteps and recalibrate, or do they double down on a strategy that has already proven ineffective? Will they finally listen to the concerns of everyday Americans, or will they continue to push a message that voters have clearly rejected? One thing is certain: the political landscape has shifted, and ignoring that reality could cost the Democrats far more than just one election. The question is, are they willing to face that truth before it's too late? What do you think? Was this loss inevitable, or could the Democrats have turned things around? Let's hear your thoughts below. The conversation is far from over.
And they set Kamala Harris up to fail. That was a 3-month campaign, and she was supposed to introduce herself to the American people. No wonder people were Googling, did Joe Biden drop out? And so...
No. No. You saying 3 months wasn't long enough? It was too long.
It was long enough.
It was long enough.
If they had a primary...
It's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone and they didn't like them.
Once again, Bill Maher hits the nail on the head. The Democrats didn't suffer from a lack of strong candidates who could have stepped in for Joe Biden. As Michael Douglas pointed out on the show, they had a deep bench: governors, senators, and rising stars with experience, competence, and the ability to lead. Yet, despite having these options, they chose to sideline them. Why? Because they were more invested in identity politics than in selecting the best leader for the job. Instead of prioritizing merit and vision, the Democrats fixated on optics. Their strategy? Pick a black female vice president to check diversity boxes and secure key voter bases. They believed this move would solidify support among women and black communities, creating an unshakable coalition. But politics isn't about virtue signaling. It's about leadership, policy, and solutions. Voters don't just want to see themselves represented. They want leaders who can actually govern, inspire confidence, and deliver results. By putting symbolism ahead of substance, the Democrats made a critical error. They underestimated the electorate, assuming that identity alone would be enough to win over hearts and minds. But people saw right through it. The choice felt more like a scripted performance than a genuine decision based on qualifications. And in the end, it wasn't enough to build trust or secure lasting support. That miscalculation may be one of the key reasons they're now facing a fierce political backlash. But here's the real problem. This isn't just about one election cycle. It's about a broader pattern. When a party prioritizes performative politics over real leadership, it creates a disconnect between itself and the people it claims to represent. Voters grow disillusioned. They start looking elsewhere, seeking leaders who speak plainly, focus on action, and reject political theater. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. The Democratic Party is at a crossroads. Will they double down on the same approach, hoping it works next time? Or will they recognize that effective leadership isn't about checking demographic boxes? It's about competence, policy, and results. Because if they don't adapt, if they continue choosing candidates based on narratives rather than merit, they risk alienating even their most loyal supporters. And in a political landscape as unpredictable as today's, that could mean the difference between winning and losing. Not just an election, but the trust of the American people. The question is, will they wake up before it's too late? What do you think? Is this backlash a wake-up call for the Democrats, or just another political cycle playing out as usual? Drop your thoughts below, because this debate is far from over.
You're the sitting vice president, and you get put on elevated to the top of the ticket 107 days ahead of the election. I think that is a very high degree of difficulty to put on anybody, and I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but we'll never know that. But I will tell you that, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign. Why?
What? To run away
Bill,
from
I don't know if you know this, but the Vice President of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
Hold on a second. This exact attitude is what pushed the Democrats into opposition in the first place. Underestimating the intelligence of the American people. That's a losing strategy every single time. Take MSNBC's John Heilemann, for example. He actually suggested that Bill Maher was overestimating Americans by saying 3 months was more than enough time for citizens to make a decision. Really? So now, believing in the ability of everyday people to think critically and form their own opinions is giving them too much credit. This is exactly the kind of elitist mindset that fuels frustration across the country. The woke left doesn't just disagree with opposing viewpoints. They act like the average American is too uninformed, too distracted, or too gullible to know what's best for themselves. No wonder one MSNBC host had the nerve to say that Americans don't even know what they want. Newsflash, we absolutely do. And it's not a government full of out-of-touch elites who think we need to be told what to believe. Americans don't want leaders who treat us like we're clueless. We want leadership that respects our intelligence, understands our struggles, and, most importantly, stands up for our interests, not the latest ideological trend. But here's the kicker. The left keeps making the same mistake. They assume people will just fall in line, nod along, and accept whatever narrative they push. They think they can silence dissent, control the conversation, and manipulate public perception. But they're wrong, because when election time rolls around, the American people don't forget. They don't forget being talked down to. They don't forget being labeled as ignorant for daring to think for themselves. And they definitely don't forget which politicians stood for them and which ones dismissed them as incapable of making their own choices. So let them keep underestimating us. Let them keep pushing their narrative, because when the votes are counted, when the results come in, they'll be hit with a reality check they never saw coming. And with that, roll the clip.
Someone like Donald Trump has become a universally known, understood, loved by some, hated by others over the course of being omnipresent for 8 years.
Okay.
Barack Obama becomes president of the United States after running for 2 years as president, runs a 50-state primary, is on television, does dozens of Democratic debates, and by the time at the end of that, most people knew who he was. Most people.
Yeah.
You drop somebody into the middle of the top of the ticket, 3 days out, 3 months out. You are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to introduce yourself to the country while also being in a steel cage death match with Donald Trump.